Imagine this for a moment. Burr, you're a trained soldier. Bar, you're armed.br, you're alert.br, but the forest is silent, too silent. No footsteps, .br, no gunfire. .br, no warning. .br, then one shot. Bop, your friend drops. Bar, you don't know from where. Bar, you don't know from whom. You look at the trees, nothing. Bar, you scan the hills, nothing. And then a terrifying thought hits you. Burr, what if the enemy isn't above you? Bar, what if he's beneath your feet? This is the true story of a sniper so invisible, so deadly, that armies didn't try to kill him. Bar, they tried to ban the ground he fought from. We'll explain everything in this video step by step. Don't skip it. They did not ban a man. They banned the ground beneath him. Bar, in the frozen forests of war where trees stood like witnesses and snow swallowed sound, there lived a kind of soldier history rarely remembers correctly. He did not shout. He did not charge. He did not conquer cities. He waited on the forest floor. This is the story of a sniper whose greatest weapon was not his rifle, but his patience, and whose silence became so deadly the enemy tried to outlaw the earth itself. He learned the forest before he learned the battlefield, long before uniforms and orders. He knew how moss breathes after rain, how snow lies differently when disturbed, how shadows move even when the sun seems still. The forest taught him one rule above all others: if you want to survive, become invisible. When war came, that lesson followed him. While others built nests in trees or sandbagged towers, he pressed himself flat against the ground. No elevated perch, no skyline silhouette, just earth, roots, needles, and snow. His hide was not built. It was borrowed from nature. He scraped away only what was necessary. He shaped the ground by hand. He packed snow with his breath frozen behind his teeth. He buried his presence so completely that even death could walk past him and never know. From the forest floor, he watched armies move like careless giants. His shots were not fast. Were inevitable. One shot, one life, then stillness again. No muzzle flash to betray him, no movement to track. The ground absorbed everything, the sound, the recoil, the secret. Enemy soldiers began to fear open spaces, then trees, then silence itself. They fired at shadows. They shelled empty forests. They blamed ghosts. And slowly, the reports began to change. Enemy sniper believed to be firing from ground-level forest concealment. Not trees, bot buildings, bar. The ground commanders were alarmed, not just by the casualties, but by the psychology. How do you fight an enemy you cannot see, cannot hear, cannot predict? How do you train soldiers when the danger lies beneath their boots? So they issued orders.br, new rules.br, new manuals. New prohibitions.br, forest floor sniper hides were labeled illegal, dishonorable, against doctrine. Some called them unsoldierly, others called them inhuman. The truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. They work too well, but BR. When tactics fail, armies adapt. When adaptation fails, they ban what they cannot beat.br. But the forest does not read orders, and the man on the ground did not change.br. He did not seek glory. He did not count fame. He counted heartbeats between shots. He understood something war often forgets. Survival is not about dominance. It is about endurance. Every day he lay there, cold seeped into bone. Insects crawled beneath clothing. Snow melted, then froze again. He endured hours without movement because movement meant death. His world shrank to a narrow field of view, and a single breath held just long enough. Above him, history thundered forward. Below him, the earth held him like a secret ground-level concealment, changed the very grammar of sniper warfare because it rejected the instinctive human desire to rise above danger. For centuries, soldiers sought height. Hills, towers, trees, rooftops. Elevation meant visibility, control, dominance. From ancient archers on ramparts to modern snipers in high-rise ruins, the logic remained the same. See first, shoot first. Ground-level concealment inverted this logic. It embraced vulnerability as strength. By choosing the forest floor, the sniper accepted discomfort, filth, cold, insects, and pain in exchange for something far more valuable than visibility. Erasure.bar. The forest floor is not empty space. It is layered, chaotic, and alive. Fallen needles soften sound. Moss absorbs vibration. Roots break up outlines. Shadows overlap endlessly, confusing the human eye that evolved to detect patterns, not disorder. When a sniper lies flush with this terrain, he is not hiding behind something, he is dissolving into everything. Unlike elevated hides, which must be constructed and therefore risk symmetry and predictability, ground-level hides emerge organically. They are shaped by hand, breath, and patience rather than tools. A few centimeters shaved from a mound of earth, a depression packed with snow, a rifle barrel threaded through dead grass. Nothing that signals intention, nothing that announces design. This tactic forced a complete rethinking of detection. Traditional counter-sniper doctrine trained soldiers to scan rooftops, tree lines, ridge lines, and windows. Optics were calibrated for angles above the horizon. Soldiers were conditioned to look forward and upward, not downward. Ground-level concealment exploited this blind spot mercilessly. A sniper firing from below knee height did not just avoid detection, he existed outside the mental map of the battlefield. Even when shots rang out, confusion followed. Sound behaved differently near the ground, bouncing unpredictably, swallowed by soil and vegetation. Muzzle flash was often invisible, masked by leaves or snow. Tracers pointed nowhere useful. Return fire punished empty trees and imaginary towers. BR. The physical discipline required for ground-level concealment was extreme, unlike elevated positions that allow for SMM. All shifts in posture. Ground-level hides demanded near-total immobility. Any movement rippled through grass, disturbed snow, or displaced debris. Hours could pass without a single adjustment. Muscles cramped, circulation slowed. Cold penetrated joints and lungs. Insects crawled freely across exposed skin. Breathing had to be shallow, controlled, timed with wind or distant noise. The sniper became a biological extension of the terrain, surrendering comfort and individuality to maintain invisibility. This endurance was not incidental. It was central to the tactic. Only someone willing to suffer quietly could make the ground-level hide viable. From a tactical perspective, ground-level concealment expanded firing possibilities while reducing risk. Shots could be taken through narrow gaps impossible from elevated angles. Targets partially shielded from above were suddenly exposed from below. Vehicles presented vulnerable underlines. Soldiers crouching or advancing low to the ground unknowingly moved into the sniper's optimal firing plane. The flat trajectory from ground level also simplified ballistic calculations at short to medium ranges, reducing the need for extreme elevation adjustments. Most importantly, escape became more feasible. Instead of descending from a tree or abandoning a constructed nest, the sniper could simply melt backward into the terrain, crawling inches at a time, leaving no trace of occupation. Psychologically, this tactic destabilized enemy morale. Sold. Ears could tolerate danger they could see. They could accept risk from identifiable sources. Ground-level snipers erased those comforts. Fear became ambient rather than directional. Every step felt exposed. The act of moving itself became threatening. Soldiers hesitated in open areas that once felt safe. Patrols slowed, units bunched together or spread too thin. Commanders struggled to reassure men when the threat did not conform to known patterns. Rumors spread faster than facts, exaggerating the sniper's abilities into something mythic. The ground itself seemed hostile, capable of killing without warning. BR attempts to counter the tactic revealed its effectiveness. Increased artillery fire tore apart forests indiscriminately, wasting ammunition on empty ground. Aggressive sweeps exhausted troops who searched endlessly without results. New rules discouraged soldiers from lying prone or remaining still for long periods, ironically making them more visible. Doctrinal bans emerged not because ground-level concealment violated laws of war, but because it violated expectations of war. It blurred the line between combatant and environment, unsettling commanders who preferred clear distinctions and controllable variables. Historically, ground-level concealment also democratized sniper effectiveness. It reduced reliance on specialized equipment or permanent structures. A skilled marksman with minimal tools could achieve results equal to or greater than those using elaborate hides. His made the tactic especially valuable in resource-scarce conditions, winter warfare, or partisan operations where mobility and secrecy mattered more than infrastructure. It rewarded knowledge of terrain over mechanical advantage, observation over aggression. In doing so, it reasserted an older truth of warfare, that understanding the land often matters more than mastering the weapon. The tactic's influence extended beyond sniping. It reshaped camouflage doctrine, emphasizing texture, depth, and irregularity over simple color matching. It influenced infantry movement, encouraging awareness of ground-level threats and more cautious advances. Training programs began to include downward scanning, ground disturbance detection, and environmental reading skills once reserved for trackers and hunters. Even modern military technologies, thermal imaging, ground sensors, drone surveillance, can trace part of their development back to the need to defeat enemies who learned how to vanish at ground level. At its core, ground-level concealment represented a philosophical shift. It rejected dominance through elevation and embraced survival through submission. The sniper did not impose himself on the landscape. He negotiated with it. He learned where to press down and where to leave untouched. He accepted slowness as strength and invisibility as power. In a war defined by explosions, movement, and noise, the ground-level sniper chose stillness. In a culture that celebrated heroes standing tall, he chose to lie flat, trusting that history does not always favor those who rise above, but sometimes those who disappear long enough to shape events from below. Psychological warfare through invisibility and silence operates on the mind long before it touches the body, because fear is most potent when it has no shape. In conventional combat, danger announces itself through noise, movement, direction. Soldiers learn to measure risk by sound and sight. Artillery whistles, engines roar, rifles crack. These signals allow the brain to assign meaning, to calculate odds, to believe survival is possible through awareness. Invisibility strips away that structure. Silence removes warning. Together they create a threat that cannot be tracked, reasoned with, or anticipated, forcing the mind into a constant state of unresolved tension. When a sniper remains unseen, the battlefield becomes psychologically inverted. Instead of danger occupying specific locations, danger becomes omnipresent. Every patch of ground feels suspect. Every pause in sound becomes suspicious rather than comforting. Soldiers begin to fear the absence of noise more than its presence. Silence, once associated with safety or rest, transforms into a signal of imminent death. This reversal corrodes morale because it removes the soldier's ability to rest mentally, even when physically stationary. The mind never disengages, never resets, never escapes the possibility that the next second could be the last. Invisibility undermines trust, not only in the environment, but in training and leadership. Soldiers are taught where to look, how to move, what cover protects them. An unseen enemy invalidates those lessons. Men scan tree lines and rooftops only to realize the threat comes from somewhere else entirely, or nowhere identifiable at all. Each failed attempt to locate the shooter chips away at confidence. Orders feel inadequate, reassurances sound hollow. The soldier begins to feel that survival depends less on skill and more on luck, which is a dangerous belief in any organized fighting force. Br. Silence amplifies imagination. Without visual confirmation, the brain fills gaps with worst-case scenarios. A single unseen sniper becomes many. One shot echoes into dozens of imagined firing positions. Casualties feel personal and arbitrary, not tactical. Soldiers start attributing intelligence and intent to the enemy beyond reality, believing the sniper is always watching, always waiting, always choosing. This perceived omniscience magnifies fear far beyond the actual physical threat posed by one individual. The enemy becomes mythologized, and myths are harder to fight than men. Br. The psychological pressure manifests physically. Movements slow. Decision-making becomes hesitant. Simple actions, crossing a clearing, standing upright, pausing to drink water, require internal debates that drain energy. Patrols lose cohesion as soldiers either cluster together out of fear or spread too far apart in an atom. PT. To reduce vulnerability. Communication suffers. Jokes disappear. Eye contact shortens. The constant mental load leads to exhaustion even in the absence of direct engagement. Units become less effective not because they are losing battles, but because they are losing certainty. Invisibility also attacks the concept of retaliation, which is central to a soldier's sense of agency. Being fired upon without the ability to respond creates helplessness. Return fire becomes symbolic rather than functional, aimed at empty spaces simply to regain a sense of control. When retaliation fails repeatedly, frustration turns inward. Anger has no outlet. Discipline erodes. Some soldiers become reckless, exposing themselves out of desperation to provoke a visible enemy. Others withdraw emotionally, conserving energy by disengaging mentally from their surroundings, which further increases vulnerability. Silence ensures that each shot carries disproportionate weight. In loud, chaotic battles, individual deaths blend into the noise of conflict. In silent engagements, every gunshot is isolated, deliberate, unmistakable. The pause before and after the shot stretches time. Witnesses remember these moments vividly. Memory anchors itself to silence more firmly than to chaos. Survivors replay the sound or lack of it long after the event. This creates lasting psychological scars, reinforcing fear even when the sniper is no longer present. The unseen enemy also disrupts leadership structures. Office. RS rely on visibility to command, direct, and inspire. When exposure invites death, leaders must hide as carefully as everyone else. This flattens authority in unhealthy ways. Orders become cautious. Initiative declines. The chain of command hesitates to move, to gather, to signal. In some cases, soldiers begin making individual survival decisions rather than collective tactical ones, weakening unit cohesion. The sniper never needs to target officers deliberately. The threat alone alters behavior. Br. Invisibility weaponizes time. The sniper does not need to fire often. Long periods of inactivity increase anxiety rather than reducing it. Soldiers wait for something to happen, trapped between anticipation and dread. The mind oscillates between hyperfocus and fatigue. Each minute stretches. Each hour feels earned rather than passed. This temporal distortion degrades operational effectiveness. Missions take longer. Schedules slip. Objectives are delayed not by resistance, but by fear of exposure. Silence also erodes the boundary between combat and rest. Traditionally, soldiers experience cycles of action and recovery. An unseen sniper collapses those cycles into one continuous state of alert. Even behind supposed cover, soldiers remain tense. Sleep becomes shallow. Dreams replay imagined threats. Over time, this constant vigilance damages judgment, increasing mistakes and friendly fire incidents. The psychological cost extends far beyond immediate casualties, affecting long-term mental health and post-war trauma. The power of invisibility lies in its ambiguity. The sniper may not even be present, yet behavior changes as if he is. This is the pinnacle of psychological warfare, influencing enemy actions without continuous engagement. The battlefield becomes shaped by what soldiers believe rather than what is happening. Entire areas are avoided. Routes are abandoned. Resources are redirected to counter a threat that may have moved on days earlier. The unseen enemy controls space without occupying it. The bar silence denies closure. When an enemy is visible, victory feels tangible. When the threat disappears without confirmation, uncertainty lingers. Soldiers are left wondering if they survived due to skill, chance, or mercy. This unresolved narrative haunts memory. The mind prefers conclusions. Invisibility offers none. Fear remains stored, ready to resurface in future conflicts triggered by quiet forests, empty streets, or sudden stillness, reinforcing the enduring psychological reach of a tactic that leaves no face, no voice, no clear moment of ending. Nature as a weapon emerges when human intention aligns with the environment rather than attempting to dominate it, turning terrain from a backdrop into an active participant in warfare. Long before modern armies mapped battlefields with grids and coordinates, survival depended on reading land like a living text. Forests, fields, snow, mud, and wind were not obstacles to overcome, but forces to be understood, are respected, and leveraged. When a soldier learns to move with the land instead of against it, the environment stops being neutral and becomes an extension of his will. The forest offers concealment not through uniformity but through chaos. Branches overlap irregularly, light filters unpredictably, and the ground is layered with organic debris that disrupts straight lines and sharp edges. Human vision is drawn to patterns, symmetry, and motion. The forest denies all three. A skilled fighter learns to break his outline, not by covering himself, but by fragmenting his presence. Clothing is chosen not to match color alone, but texture. Stillness is timed with wind. Movement follows natural rhythms. Even breathing is adjusted to avoid disturbing loose material. In this relationship, the soldier does not impose camouflage on the forest. He allows the forest to camouflage him. Snow transforms the land into both enemy and ally. It punishes mistakes instantly, recording footprints, compressions, and disturbances like a ledger of movement. Yet for those who understand it, snow also erases sound, absorbs shock, and reflects light in ways that confuse depth perception. A body pressed into snow reshapes it subtly, creating shadows that appear natural once refrozen. Exhaled breath can be hidden by timing with wind or burying the face into insulating layers. Cold slows everything, including detection, granting patience an advantage over speed. Snow rewards preparation and punishes haste, making it an ideal medium for those willing to endure. Wind is an invisible collaborator. It carries scent, masks sound, bends vegetation, and shifts light. When used intentionally, it becomes a tactical tool. Shots timed with gusts vanish into background noise. Movement synchronized with swaying branches becomes unnoticeable. Even human presence is dispersed as scent is broken and scattered. Those who ignore wind fight alone. Those who understand it fight with an ally that never tires. Mastery of wind requires humility because it cannot be controlled, only anticipated and respected. The ground itself is a weapon when understood deeply. Soil density affects sound. Moist earth swallows footsteps, frozen ground betrays them. Leaf litter can be arranged to conceal disturbance. or left untouched to avoid drawing attention. Roots and depressions provide natural firing positions that require no construction. By using existing features, the fighter leaves no signature of occupation. When he departs, the land remains unchanged, offering no clues to pursuit. This absence of trace frustrates enemies trained to look for signs of human alteration. Light plays a decisive role in environmental warfare. The land shapes light in complex ways, creating pockets of brightness and shadow that shift throughout the day. A soldier who studies these patterns learns when to move and when to wait. Morning light reveals what evening hides. Low sun angles elongate shadows, masking forms. Overcast skies flatten contrasts, allowing movement in plain sight. The environment dictates the clock of survival. Fighting against these rhythms invites exposure. Fighting within them grants protection. Sound behaves differently in natural spaces. Forests muffle high frequencies while carrying low ones. Open fields transmit noise cleanly but offer little cover. Waterways distort direction, reflecting sound unpredictably. A fighter attuned to these properties chooses when silence is absolute and when noise can be hidden. Even small actions, shifting weight, adjusting equipment, are planned around environmental acoustics. The land becomes a filter, selectively revealing or concealing human presence based on understanding rather than force. Weather multiplies the environment's role as a weapon. Rain erases tracks, dampens sound, and lowers visibility. Fog compresses distance, turning long sight lines into intimate spaces where surprise dominates. Heat exhausts and dehydrates, slowing reactions and dulling senses. Cold stiffens muscles and reduces endurance. Those who prepare for these conditions gain an advantage that feels unfair to the unprepared. Nature does not distribute hardship evenly. It favors those who adapt rather than resist. Using nature as a weapon also reshapes psychology. A soldier who trusts the land gains confidence without arrogance. He knows that survival depends on listening as much as acting. This mindset reduces impulsive behavior. Patience becomes a tactical virtue. Each eland teaches restraint, reminding the fighter that time and observation often matter more than aggression. This mental alignment deepens effectiveness as decisions are made in harmony with conditions rather than in defiance of them. For the enemy, fighting someone fused with the environment is profoundly unsettling. Traditional indicators of threat disappear. There is no clear boundary between safe and dangerous spaces. The land itself feels complicit. Forests appear to watch. Snow seems to hide secrets. Wind feels like a whisper of warning. This psychological effect magnifies the physical advantage as fear spreads into places previously considered neutral. The environment ceases to be a backdrop and becomes an accomplice in every engagement. The integration of human skill with terrain also reduces dependence on technology. When tools fail, freeze, or run out of power, the land remains. Knowledge of terrain cannot be jammed, intercepted, or destroyed. It is carried in memory and practice. This resilience makes environmental mastery especially powerful in prolonged or resource-scarce conflicts. The fighter becomes adaptable, capable of operating effectively even when stripped of external support. At its deepest level, using nature as a weapon requires surrendering ego. The land does not respond to dominance, it responds to understanding. Those who attempt to conquer it reveal themselves through disturbance and excess. Those who learn from it gain protection without draw. Attention. In this relationship, victory is not achieved by overwhelming force, but by alignment. Human intention flowing through natural form, turning forests, fields, snow, wind, and shadow into silent partners in survival, and military fear leading to the banning of effective tactics is not born from ethics or honor, but from loss of control. Armies are institutions built on predictability. They function through doctrine, repetition, hierarchy, and rules that define acceptable behavior on the battlefield. When a tactic emerges that consistently defeats trained forces while defying existing frameworks, it creates more than casualties, it creates uncertainty. Uncertainty spreads upward through command structures, eroding confidence in planning, training, and authority. Fear begins not at the front line, but in headquarters, where the inability to explain or neutralize a threat becomes intolerable. Effective tactics that cannot be easily countered expose the fragility of military systems. Doctrine exists to standardize behavior so large numbers of soldiers can act cohesively. A tactic that relies on individual patience, environmental mastery, and invisibility resists standardization. It cannot be easily taught through manuals alone, cannot be measured through drills, and cannot be enforced through rigid timelines. This lack of controllability alarms institutions that depend on uniformity. When effectiveness arises from personal discipline rather than collective procedure, leadership perceives it as a threat to order rather than an asset. Fear intensifies when casualties occur without clear explanations. Losses are an accepted part of war, but they are expected to follow patterns. Ambushes from known directions, fire from identifiable positions, engagements within understood ranges. When soldiers die without visible enemies, commanders struggle to justify those losses to both superiors and subordinates. Reports become vague. Language grows evasive. Phrases like suspected positions and probable enemy presence replace certainty. This ambiguity undermines accountability, and fear grows in the space where responsibility cannot be clearly assigned. Banning a tactic often begins as an attempt to reassert authority. By declaring certain methods unacceptable, leadership draws a boundary around chaos. The ban becomes a statement. This behavior lies outside what we recognize as legitimate warfare. It allows institutions to reclaim narrative control, reframing failure not as an inability to adapt, but as a refusal to engage in methods deemed improper. In this way, bans function as psychological armor for command structures, protecting them from confronting uncomfortable truths about vulnerability and inadequacy. Moral language is frequently used to justify these bans, but it often masks deeper anxieties. Tactics that rely on concealment, patience, and asymmetry challenge romanticized images of warfare that emphasize courage expressed through visibility and confrontation. An enemy who refuses to be seen feels dishonorable to those raised on ideals of open battle, even when such ideals are historically selective. Labeling a tactic as unethical allows fear to be repackaged as principle, making it easier to enforce compliance and silence dissent. Fear also arises from the difficulty of retaliation. Militaries are designed around reciprocal violence, attack, response, escalation. When an effective tactic disrupts this cycle, it creates frustration and helplessness at scale. Leaders cannot promise revenge or resolution. They cannot point to progress on maps. The enemy seems to act without presenting opportunities for decisive engagement. This asymmetry erodes confidence not only among soldiers, but among political leaders and civilian populations who expect visible signs of control and momentum. The banning of effective tactics often reflects a failure to adapt training and mindset. Adapting requires acknowledging that previous assumptions were flawed. It requires time, resources, and a willingness to change deeply ingrained habits. Fear encourages shortcuts. Instead of evolving doctrine, institutions attempt to legislate the problem away. Prohibitions replace innovation. Enforcement replaces understanding. This response provides immediate psychological relief to leadership, even as it leaves forces vulnerable in practice. There is also fear of imitation. Once a tactic proves effective, it threatens to spread. If one enemy can use it, others will learn. The prospect of widespread adoption magnifies anxiety. A single sniper becomes a template. A localized problem becomes a strategic nightmare. Banning the tactic internally becomes a way to contain its legitimacy, signaling that it should not be studied, refined, or embraced. This intellectual quarantine limits discussion and slows adaptation, but it preserves the illusion that the tactic is aberrant rather than instructive. Historically, bans often target methods that blur the line between soldier and environment. Such tactics unsettle legal and cultural definitions of combatant behavior. When fighters appear indistinguishable from terrain, traditional identification fails. This challenges rules of engagement and complicates command decisions. Rather than confronting these complexities, institutions may choose prohibition, simplifying reality at the cost of effectiveness. Fear of complexity becomes fear of the tactic itself. The irony is that banning effective tactics rarely eliminates them. It drives them underground or pushes them into the hands of those less constrained by doctrine. The very qualities that make a tactic frightening, simplicity, adaptability, reliance on human skill, make it resilient to prohibition. While one side debates legality, the other continues to refine execution. Fear thus creates an uneven battlefield, favoring those willing to embrace uncertainty over those desperate to regulate it. Military fear is also social. Leaders fear loss of credibility among peers. Units fear being labeled undisciplined if they adopt unconventional methods. Innovation becomes risky when deviation from doctrine invites punishment rather than reward. This social pressure reinforces bans, even when frontline experience suggests their impracticality. Soldiers learn to suppress lessons learned in combat if those lessons contradict official narratives. Fear silences feedback, freezing doctrine in place while reality moves on. At a deeper level, banning effective tactics reflects fear of humility. Acknowledging that an enemy has found a better way requires admitting inferiority, even temporarily. Institutions built on strength struggle with this admission. It is easier to dismiss the tactic as unfair or improper than to accept that adaptability and patience have outperformed firepower and structure. This resistance preserves pride but sacrifices learning. Over time, the memory of why a tactic was banned fades, leaving only the prohibition itself. New generations inherit rules without understanding their origins. The fear that birthed the ban becomes institutional habit. Meanwhile, the underlying principles resurface elsewhere under new names, rediscovered by those outside the original framework. History repeats not because lessons are forgotten, but because fear prevented them from being fully learned and integrated in the first place. Endurance, patience, and humility, shaping battlefield impact, redefine what strength looks like in war by shifting focus from speed and dominance to resilience and restraint. These qualities are rarely celebrated because they do not produce dramatic moments. They operate quietly over long periods, accumulating advantage in ways that are difficult to measure or glorify. Yet across history, battles and campaigns have turned not on who moved fastest or struck hardest, but on who endured longest, waited wisely, and accepted their limitations in relation to the environment and the enemy. Endurance begins with the body, but it is sustained by the mind. The ability to remain functional under prolonged discomfort separates those who survive from those who falter. Cold, heat, hunger, thirst, exhaustion, and isolation erode decision-making long before they cause physical collapse. A soldier who endures these pressures without rushing toward relief maintains clarity while others seek escape. This clarity allows for better judgment, fewer mistakes, and a greater ability to exploit fleeting opportunities. Endurance is not passive suffering, it is active resistance to degradation. Patience governs the use of endurance. Without patience, endurance becomes wasted suffering. Waiting is not merely the absence of action, it is the deliberate postponement of action until conditions align. On the battlefield, patience means resisting the impulse to fire too early, move too soon, or reveal presence for temporary relief. It requires confidence that time itself can be shaped. and two, an advantage. This confidence grows from experience and self-control, not from orders or equipment. Patience allows a fighter to let the enemy make the first mistake, to act when certainty replaces possibility. Humility anchors both endurance and patience by keeping ego in check. A humble soldier does not assume superiority, he assumes vulnerability. This assumption sharpens awareness. It encourages listening rather than asserting, observing rather than rushing. Humility allows learning from terrain, from silence, from the enemy's behavior. It accepts that survival is not guaranteed by rank, technology, or training alone. This mindset reduces recklessness and increases adaptability as the soldier remains open to changing plans based on new information. Together, these traits alter battlefield tempo. Instead of reacting to enemy movements, the enduring and patient fighter dictates when engagement occurs. He slows the fight, stretching time to his advantage. This frustrates opponents conditioned for momentum and quick resolution. The battle becomes less about overwhelming force and more about waiting out mistakes, fatigue, and overconfidence. In this slowed environment, small advantages compound. A single well-timed action can outweigh hours of aggressive movement. Endurance also preserves operational capability over extended periods. Forces that conserve energy through patience remain effective when others are depleted. Fatigue narrows attention and increases errors. Those who endure without panic retain broader situational awareness. They notice subtle changes, shifts in sound, altered patterns of movement, inconsistencies in routine. These observations become actionable intelligence. Patience turns endurance into insight. Humility influences interaction with the environment. A humble fighter adapts to terrain instead of forcing it to conform. He accepts discomfort rather than trying to eliminate it. This acceptance reduces unnecessary movement and noise. It fosters stillness, which in turn enhances concealment and observation. The environment becomes a partner rather than an obstacle. This partnership amplifies effectiveness without expending additional resources. Psychologically, these traits undermine enemy confidence. An opponent expects reactions, fear, haste, visible effort. When none appear, uncertainty grows. Enduring silence suggests control. Patience implies foresight. Humility manifests as restraint that is often misinterpreted as weakness until it proves otherwise. This misreading creates openings. The enemy advances, relaxes, or exposes vulnerabilities under the assumption of dominance. The patient fighter capitalizes without haste. Endurance also shapes group dynamics. Units that value it over bravado cultivate trust. Soldiers rely on each other to maintain discipline during prolonged inactivity. Patience becomes collective, reducing impulsive actions that endanger the group. Humility allows individuals to accept correction and share observations without fear of appearing weak. This environment supports better decision-making and resilience under stress. In contrast, forces driven by impatience burn through morale quickly. The desire for quick results leads to repeated exposure, wasted effort, and frustration. Each failure compounds fatigue. Endurance resists this cycle. It accepts that progress may be invisible for long stretches. This acceptance preserves mental health, preventing the spiral of disappointment that undermines cohesion. Humility also affects leadership. Leaders who embody it listen more than they speak. They respect the limits of their knowledge and the experience of those around them. This creates flexible command structures capable of adjusting to reality rather than clinging to plans. Such leaders are better equipped to recognize when waiting is wiser than acting, when restraint serves the mission more than aggression. Over time, endurance, patience, and humility shape outcomes beyond individual engagements. They influence campaigns by conserving strength and morale. They allow forces to operate effectively in harsh conditions where others falter. They reduce unnecessary losses, preserving experienced personnel. The cumulative effect is strategic rather than dramatic. Victory emerges not from singular moments of heroism, but from sustained effectiveness. These traits also leave a distinct imprint on memory. Battles won through endurance and patience are often underreported because they lack spectacle. Yet participants remember them deeply. The quiet tension, the discipline required to wait, the humility to accept discomfort become defining experiences. These memories reinforce the values that made survival possible, passing them to future generations through example rather than doctrine. In a culture that often equates strength with speed and aggression, endurance, patience, and humility redefine power as the ability to remain composed when everything pushes toward action. They transform the battlefield from a test of force into a test of character, where the quiet virtues determine who remains effective when conditions are most demanding. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.